You ever look at the world today and just feel like it's, well, chaotic? It can feel that way for sure, but what if there's a predictable pattern underneath it all? Today, we're going to dive into investor Ray Dalio's incredible 500-year study on how great empires rise and fall. Maybe, just maybe, we can find some answers.
I mean, think about it. Economic turmoil, deep political divisions, this constant talk of shifting global power. It really does feel like we're all trying to navigate a massive storm without a map. But what if a map actually exists? That's the core idea behind Ray Dalio's work. He suggests there's this hidden cycle in history, a pattern that might just tell us exactly where we are and maybe even what's coming next.
Now, this wasn't just some casual history lesson, you know? Dalio and his team went on a full-on data-driven mission. They did a deep dive analyzing the rise and fall of empires over centuries. We're talking the Dutch, the British, the US, and now China, all to uncover these hidden forces that are driving these huge, world-changing shifts in power. So, what did he actually find? Well, the first part of this big cycle is what he calls the ascent. And get this, rising empires don't just stumble into greatness, it's not luck. He found they follow a surprisingly consistent formula for building up all that wealth and power.
Okay, so think of these 8 things as gears in a massive, powerful engine. The key is they don't work alone. They all turn each other. It's a chain reaction, right? A strong education system, that fuels innovation. That innovation gives you a competitive edge in global trade. More trade means you need a strong military to protect those trade routes. And all this success, it builds up your financial centers until eventually your currency becomes the world's reserve currency. That's the one everyone trusts and uses for big international deals. It's this incredible self-reinforcing upward spiral where each gear just pushes the next one faster and faster.
And this whole ascent process, Dalio found, creates an empire that usually lasts for about 250 years, give or take. We've seen it play out before. The Dutch in the 1600s, the British in the 1800s, they both followed this exact playbook right to the top. But, as history always seems to show us, reaching the peak is also the moment you get closest to the edge.
And this is the crucial turning point. It's kind of ironic, really. The very success that an empire builds, all that incredible wealth and power, actually starts to sow the seeds of its own downfall. That powerful engine we were talking about, it starts to sputter, and then it begins to run in reverse.
Yeah, this slide really lays it all out, doesn't it? It's like 2 totally different worlds. On one side, you have the rising powers. They're built on hard work. They have low debt. Their people are generally united. But then you look at the declining powers, and it's the exact opposite. They're often plagued by people who inherited their wealth, not earned it. They're drowning in debt just to maintain their lifestyle and an overstretched military. And, maybe most importantly, they're torn apart by deep, bitter internal conflicts.
And Dalio's take on this is pretty blunt, let's be honest. He says prosperity basically breeds complacency. That grit, that discipline, that unity that built the empire in the first place, it just kind of fades away. It gets replaced by a focus on leisure and just buying more stuff. And this huge cultural shift leaves the dominant power fragile, over-leveraged, and wide open for those hungry, rising challengers.
Okay, so now we're entering what is by far the most dangerous part of the whole cycle, the actual transfer of power. As the old empire gets weaker and the new one gets stronger, they inevitably start to clash. And if history has taught us anything, it's that this transition is almost never peaceful.
Dalio's research here uncovered a pattern that is, well, disturbingly consistent. It almost always starts with a big debt crisis and an economic collapse. That in turn sparks these intense internal fights over money and values, sometimes even boiling over into a civil war. And it's at this exact moment, when the empire is at its most vulnerable, that it often finds itself in a war with that rising competitor. And then, from the ashes of all that conflict, a brand new world order is born.
We saw this exact thing happen with the Dutch Empire, right? It was weakened by debt and a ton of internal fighting, and it ultimately fell to a stronger rising Britain during conflicts like the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War.
And then, guess what? We saw it happen all over again. A British Empire absolutely buried in debt after 2 devastating world wars had to give way to the United States. The US came out of that period as the new dominant power, and it was America that shaped the world order that most of us grew up in.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? Where are we in this cycle today? Well, Dalio applies this exact same framework to the dynamic we see right now between the current power, the US, and the rising power, China.
And let's just say the data starts to paint a very clear picture. Just take a look at world trade, for example. That's one of those 8 key metrics we talked about. You can see the U.S. share has been on a downward trend ever since its peak after World War II. Meanwhile, China's share, it has just skyrocketed, especially since the year 2000. According to the model, this is a classic sign of a major shift in economic power.
And what about debt? Well, think about this for a second. The U.S. has gone from being the world's biggest lender, the creditor, to being its biggest borrower, its biggest debtor. We're borrowing huge amounts of money to finance our spending. In Dalio's model, a complete reversal like that is a massive red flag for a late-stage empire.
And then there's the internal situation. We're seeing all the classic signs that show up during a power transition. Huge gaps in wealth and values, extreme political polarization, the rise of populism on both the left and the right. I mean, does any of this sound familiar? These are those deep internal conflicts that really weaken an empire from the inside out, and they make it so much harder to solve any of the big problems.
So, when you put it all together, Dalio's framework shows a picture of a rising China that's really hitting its stride in those key areas like technology and trade. At the same time, it shows the U.S. displaying the classic signs of a power in relative decline, really high debt, and those deep, deep internal divisions.
And all of this leaves us with Dalio's most critical question. History would suggest that reversing this kind of decline is, well, it's nearly impossible. But the real question is, does it have to end in a catastrophic conflict? Is it possible to reform the system, to find a way to grow the economic pie and divide it more fairly so we can manage this transition peacefully? The odds might be long, but the answer to that question will literally define the future of our world.